So obviously the Egyptians, they you credit them for a lot of the stuff that we find, but
Oh yeah.
they obviously accomplished amazing things. They were great stone workers, but
Oh yeah.
then there's this other which appears to be far more precise, far more just accurate set of stonework and work
Right.
that someone has left us with, whether it was the Egyptians or whether it was a civilization that came before them. I think those are the types of questions that you're asking. Can we talk a little bit about some of the ancient technology that you see and the contradictions between the two industries, if you will?
Absolutely. Yes. And I do want to qualify exactly what you said, which is that it's like I don't feel like by asking these questions we're taking anything away from the dynastic Egyptian civilization. That was an amazing civilization. Like more than 3,000 years. They've lasted longer than our kind of civilization has so far. It depends which way you think we're going. Um, yeah, and they achieved wondrous things. Like they were an incredible organization, amazing culture. I think all of their religion, their focus on death and the afterlife, all of that's amazing. But they were a Bronze Age culture, and we know the tools that they used. I mean, and we know how they did things based on the scenes on the wall that they would draw, or that the records that we found. And this, they were using very simplistic tools. And in fact, you can look at sort of some of the tools that they had. We're talking about tools like flint chisels, copper chisels, pounding stones, sand, very simple wooden instruments for like alignments and things like that. They were very skilled woodworkers, but their ability to work in what I would term, very hard stone, and this is typically what you see from the oldest periods of Egypt, is that you see stonework that's done in extremely hard stone, like granite diorite, basalt, things like this, which are just frankly a kind of a silly choice to work in. Like
Yeah.
this is, if everyone has like a mortar and pestle at home that's made from granite, I mean, do you protect that mortar and pestle from the tiles on your counter, or are you like, protecting the tiles from the mortar and pestle? Like that's what you have to do, though, because this thing will break anything that you smash it into. It's not
Mhm.
going to break. Like this is hard stuff, and if you go on the Mohs scale of hardness, which I think a fingernail is like a 2, chalk or whatever is like a 2.5 or something like that. Copper is a 3.5. Iron's 4. Steel is 5.5. And you go up to like where granite can be 5.5, 6.5. Diorite, flint 7, 7.5, 8. Corundums a 9. Diamond being a 10. It sort of goes up to about 9, and then you go up here to 10
Mhm.
for diamond. Diamond is like a fair bit harder than everything else. Gemstones, beryl, corundum, things like that are around a 9, and we see evidence for stones being worked that go right up to that 9. There's literally vases that come from the earliest periods of time that have very high degrees of corundum in them or flint in them, and it's like this is incredibly tough stuff to work. And not only do we see it worked and worked efficiently, we see it worked in just massive scale and with incredible precision. Like that's just mind-boggling when you look at it. Everyone sort of may have seen pictures of the pyramids and the Giza Plateau, but when you go there and it's sort of, I don't know if it just comes at you that fast, but it's like you got to remember some of this work, particularly places like the Valley Temple, which is made up of granite blocks that weigh 60, 70 tons. These are mortarless joints, like they're precisely laid. In fact, I mean, this is an example of sort of joins in these granite stones of the you know of the Valley Temple. There's actually a
Wow.
horizontal join up top, but there's also a vertical join that you can barely even perceive, and this is absolutely remarkable. I mean, the outside of these surfaces of stones. I mean, here's some examples of some of the joinery that you see in places like the Valley Temple. Um, they're not uniform, they're not linear. The blocks aren't the same sizes. They go
Mhm.
around corners. It's truly remarkable, and you also have to remember that this structure and these objects come from the Old Kingdom, which is like the start of the Egyptian civilization. The third, fourth dynasty of the Old Kingdom is where they're attributed.
Mhm. And this is fascinating because not only do you see blocks like this in Egypt, but you see blocks like this in South
You
America
do.
as well. And,
Yeah.
the mainstream will tell us that it's from the same period of time, from two different cultures that had never met each
Well,
other.
different periods of time.
Different periods of time that had never crossed the oceans,
Right.
that hadn't met each other. And here we're seeing very, very similar
Oh,
megalithic stonework in completely different parts of the world, which if sea level was 400 feet lower and we had a civilization that was able to navigate the world in a more effective way than certainly we could have, a couple of thousand years ago, then your theories become a little bit more, it becomes plausible. It starts to make a little bit more sense seeing all of these giant megalithic stonework, all over the world in similar construction
indeed.
methods.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's one of the biggest indicators, and it's something people have talked about a fair bit, that there is a massive similarity between the styles of megalithic building in very hard stone that we see all around the world. And as you said, sometimes, if you take the stuff in South America, in the Sacred Valley of Peru,
Is it Sacsayhuaman? Is that
Sacsayhuaman
where you
around
see
Cusco.
similar to this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. You saw these pictures. I mean, I would actually love to show you the third pyramid. Maybe I have a picture of that. I don't right here. But I do have South America stuff here. I mean, you're looking at stuff like this, which is in the streets of Cusco. It's also granite. You have these styles, and if the mainstream attribution of this stuff is like the Inca, which was the 1500s, 14 to 1500s versus 2500, 2700 BC for the Egyptians. Those are the mainstream dating. And this, it isn't just in these two places. I mean, we see this on Easter Island, we see it in Turkey, we see it in Lebanon. You see a style. I mean, it's theorized, and certainly there's debatable sites, and even in Russia and New Zealand and all around the world. There's people that try to look at this and say, is this the remnants of this type of construction? Because I mean, over time, this will actually eventually fall apart if the ground shifts or earthquakes happen. I think it's a tremendous indicator of some global connection. This might be an indicator for a civilization that was potentially globe spanning. I certainly, if I think about what an ancient civilization, a lost ancient civilization that had high tech capabilities, able to do this sort of work with ease, I mean, I do think it was globe spanning. It may have had different offshoots, and there's nuance and detail in all of this. But I mean, it's a tremendous indicator, and this isn't work that you typically see done in later periods. One of the explanations for why this happens, and this is one you get from mainstream, I guess, or archaeologists, and it's this concept that they were solving the same problem. It's like, okay, we know that if you're trying to figure out how to make a spear point, right, you're probably going to nap stone and get to a similar result. You might have different techniques, and indeed that is how we make distinctions between like Clovis cultures and later indigenous American, Native American cultures. Then you might getting to the same place, but literally if you're trying to build a wall or a structure, it's tough for me to believe that independently different cultures came up with pretty much the hardest and most challenging way to do that imaginable. Like, we don't build like this today because it's insanely difficult. Like, not only is this
what's the explanation for how they could even build something like that?
I don't know. They literally, and the funny thing about South America in particular is that it's just like a 150-year period that supposedly all of this happened in. You have multiple styles there. And again, this is mortarless joints. And in places in South America, in particularly in the streets of Cusco, you can also see this at Sacsayhuaman, which is one of the sites around Cusco in Peru. And you can kind of see it up here in this corner. You see this where the walls sort of come apart.
Mm-hmm.
You see that nice sharp line.
Mm-hmm.
What you're seeing is the outside surface, the front surface is a little rougher. Perhaps it was more polished in the past, but you can pretty clearly see how perfectly well made those inside surfaces are, the joining surfaces, the mating surfaces between the stones. And we're not talking about straight lines here. Like, this is not like it's 90-degree, straight lines with 90-degree corners. These things are curved. They match through the full depth of the stone. Like, these are perfectly matched mating surfaces. It's a real mystery to me as to how you do this, because any conventional means would involve a process of, particularly a Bronze Age or a relatively primitive culture, grinding on this stone. You're somehow lifting up these 20 or 50 or 100-ton blocks and, okay, just check it out, Johnson, and put a bit of chalk on and where it lands, and then, okay, grind that spot down and have this slow process. I just don't think that's a feasible answer. I don't know how it was done. There's certainly plenty of evidence for things like machining, particularly in Egypt, but also in South America, machining and other sort of powerful tools that have been used to shape the stone. I legitimately believe that's a possibility, and I think we see plenty of strong evidence for it. It may extend to realms of like, well, they had some technique of working the stone that we don't understand. I actually do think it's a legitimate possibility that some of these answers might be outside of our current scope or knowledge of technology, which is one of the reasons why I think we should be open-minded about it, because I think if we study it, we might actually end up learning something.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, it looks like there's, it looks like two different technologies. It looks like you've got a base layer, and we know this happens today when humans come into an old area, we just build right on top of it. It certainly appears that, that's what's happening here. You've got this highly sophisticated stonework at the bottom, and then
you have the rocks on top.
Right, you just throw some rocks on top with the next civilization.
Yeah, this is Alante Tambo. Which is not to be overlooked. You have to catch if you want to go to Machu Picchu, you go through from the train at Alante Tambo, but don't miss visiting Alante Tambo itself, one of the best sites for this evidence and this layering. And this, in fact, is the same thing that we see in Egypt, but it's very pronounced in South America, which is the highest technology, the most sophisticated, largest stonework is at the bottom. Like, it's literally in South America, it's clear as day once you see it. There's three different layers, and they have these terms. It's terms that come from a guy named Jesus Gamara and his father, who've been studying the Sacred Valley region for like 60, 70 years now. There's essentially the bottom layer is what they call Hanan Pacha, which is the monolithic work. So it's like the living mountain, and you see in a lot of places. I probably have some examples of Hanan Pacha here. This is Hanan Pacha. So it's where it's not cellular. It's this like carving into the the living rock of the mountain itself. And some places it's very strange. It's flowing, it's shaped, it's carved. Some places it looks more precise like this, whereas they're going for some particular effect. This was at a site called Napahuaca, which is not rarely seen, not really part of the regular tourist pathway. This was destroyed, as many things were, by the Spanish, thinking that there might have been gold inside it or something. It was blown apart. This is always at the bottom layer, and then that's followed by what they call Uran Pacha, which is the cellular megalithic work that we just saw, streets of Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, and it's these huge, precise blocks of stone that are locked together in intricate patterns. Not always curved, sometimes quite linear. The Kerkwyk in the center of Cusco is a great example of megalithic architecture that really matches what you see in Egypt. And then on top of that is what we saw before, what they would call the I think it's Inku Pacha, which is the Inca work. Where was that picture? Here, this thing. So there's literally this huge gap, and you always see this work on top. It's loose stone. It's local stone, often with mud mortar. Whereas you see the megalithic work is often made of a single type of stone that will have a quarry that's miles away, and we're talking about miles over mountains at altitude with rivers and valleys between them. And there's this huge jump up to then what we think was happening, what I'd postulate, and many other people do too, is that the Inca they found these abandoned megalithic sites when they came into the Sacred Valley, and they were rebuilding them. And there's plenty of evidence for that. Even the Spanish saw them trying to do that when they came in. These guys were trying to move some big stones around and failing in some cases. And you see that in process where they've tried to put the jigsaw puzzle back together. And if they couldn't, they would often take one of these stones and they would use them in their own building. They'd put them as a lintel over a doorway. And it's just this one megalithic stone embedded in this wall of like just sort of, just regular random stonework that's put together with mud mortar that would very much match the capabilities of a civilization like the Inca. And on these megalithic sites, they've been repairing them. You see this, it's clear as day at Sacsayhuaman and Alante Tambo. You see these later layers, yet, kind of the orthodox explanation for this is, well, the Inca did all of this. They did all three styles, and they did it all within a 150-year period that was essentially the length of their civilization. It just doesn't make any sense.
Nothing came before them.
And there is some. They talk about some people that came before them, but generally the buildings attributed to the Inca. The sites are Inca sites. But Yeah, I think it's complete nonsense, and it's clear as day in South America.